Ben Tennyson groaned as he slowly opened his eyes. What happened, he asked himself. Last thing he remembered was enjoying a nice smoothie when a strange hole opened up in thin air and he was sucked into it. Wobbling to his feet, Ben looked around. Much to his surprise, he found himself in some kind of desert. It was night time, obvious from the fact that the sky was dark and there was a crescent moon up there. Okay, Ben said. Where am I? He looked to the left, then to the right. Nothing as far as the eye could see. But that changed as soon as he turned around. Whoa, he breathed. Standing in the distance was some kind of massive dome. Ben had never seen that before in his entire life. Did it belong to humans or aliens? Was it safe to go there? Well, Ben admitted. It's better than staying out in the desert and waiting for something to happen. He activated the Ultimatrix and switched the dial to Jet Ray. With that, he slammed down on the dial and transformed into the giant red stingray. Jet Ray! Jet Ray yelled despite the fact that there was no one there to hear it. Man, I never get tired of that. Taking off into the sky, Jet Ray zoomed at his fastest speed to get to the giant dome. As he flew, Jet Ray thought about the events that brought him to this wasteland. Okay, Ben. Think. You were having a smoothie with Gwen and Kevin, then a hole opens up and you get sucked in. But what was that hole in the first place? It didn't look like any portal I had seen before. And what made the portal anyway? All this and more jumbled through Ben's mind as he got closer to the giant dome. He wondered what kind of people lived in that dome and if they could help him. But then the possibility that there was no one there at all occurred to Ben. A big dome like that in the middle of a desert? Well, Ben had encountered many bizarre places that turned out not to be deserted. But usually the inhabitants of those places were far from friendly. But just as he was within walking distance of the dome, a giant hand of sand came out of the ground and grabbed Jet Ray in its fist. Hey! Jet Ray yelled. What in the? Let me go! And then Jet Ray saw that the giant hand belonged to a giant made of sand. It rose out of the ground and looked at Jet Ray, who was struggling to get out of the giant's clutches. Who dares trespass to the sanctity of last notches? The creature bellowed at Jet Ray. What manner of creature be you? You are not a hollow or an Arankar. Last notches? Jet Ray asked. Is that what that dome thing is called? If he recalled correctly, there was no place on Earth that went by the name of Last Notches. Then again, it sounded Spanish. Did he somehow wind up in Spain? Then he remembered the sand monster's other two questions. Hollow? Arankar? What in the world are you talking about? Where am I? Do you jest with me, creature? The sand giant rumbled. You expect me to believe that you came to Hueco Mundo by accident? Hueco Mundo? Ben thought. Was that the name of the desert? Now Ben was really confused. He remembered studying deserts in geography. And he had never heard of a desert called Hueco Mundo. Do you take me for a fool, monstrosity? The sand giant asked. Look who's talking, Jet Ray shot back, annoyed that this freak show made of sand had the nerve to call him a monstrosity. Look, I'm just a little lost, that's all. I have no idea where I am or how I got here. Just let me through and see whoever's in charge of this place. The sand monster bellowed in laughter. Now I know that you take me for a fool, creature. I allow no intruders to enter the sanctity of Last Notches. Aizen-sama does not need to be bothered by a creature like you. Jet Ray struggled not to laugh. Aizen-sama, he asked. What kind of a name is that? You dare insult Aizen-sama, the monster roared. I'll crush you. Yeah, right, Jet Ray said. He fired neuroshock beams out of his eyes and straight into the sand creature's head. It was a bullseye. But Jet Ray's victory was short-lived as the beams went through the creature's head and he merely reformed it. Oh, was Jet Ray could say. Roaring, the sand creature raised its fist and slammed it down to the ground. Jet Ray groaned in pain as he struggled to get free. He tried using his beams on the creature's hand. It blasted the fingers, giving Jet Ray enough time to fly out before they reformed. The sand creature tried to swat at Jet Ray, but Jet Ray was much faster and easily his opponent's attempts at capturing him. He kept trying his neuroshock blasts on the guy, but it had no effect on the sand body. Okay, think, Jet Ray told himself. Laser beams don't hurt him, so what can? Then it occurred to him. Of course. Jet Ray flew to the ground and landed. The sand creature noticed this and raised its fist again. Quickly, Jet Ray touched the Ultimatrix dial. In a flash of light, Jet Ray was gone. In his place was a humanoid creature in a reddish exoskeleton with a domed helmet-like structure covering the back of his head. Overall, he looked like an oyster or clam on a human-like body. Water hazard, this new form cried. What in all creation? The sand being said, thrown off the intruder's bizarre transformation. Thinking quickly, Water Hazard raised his hands. You look like you need to cool off, he said, and released powerful jets of water out of his hands, drenching the sand being. No, it yelled. Not water. It let out a wail of despair that turned into a gurgling. Water Hazard decided not to take any chances and continued shooting water at it. The sand creature was soon reduced to a pile of mud. Water Hazard took advantage and started running towards the giant dome apparently called Last Notches. Without even looking back to see if the creature had reformed or not, Water Hazard ran towards the wall. He touched the dial and turned into a wide creature with a white front and yellow back. Cannonbolt, he cried before curling up into a ball and smashing through the wall. Seeing that he was inside, Cannonbolt turned back into Ben. He looked at the gaping hole he had just made. He grimaced at the size of it. Maybe I should have used Big Chill instead, he said to himself. That way I could have went through it without smashing it. Ben decided it was time to look at his surroundings. It looked like some kind of dark tunnel. He couldn't so much as a single thing in front of him. The only light was the light of the moon behind him. Oh, just great, Ben grumbled. I can't see a thing in front and I have no idea if there's anyone here who can help me figure out where on Earth am I. That is, if I'm still on Earth. Ben gulped at the thought. Well, he had never heard of Hueco Mundo and he had no idea what that sand beast was. What really interested him was the fact that his Ultimatrix didn't scan the creature. Just where in the universe had Ben been taken to? Well, he finally said. Guess I have no choice. Taking a deep breath, Ben continued onward into the darkness. Meanwhile, in another part of Last Notches, a meeting was being held. It seems we have an intruder. An intellectual but obnoxious voice said. How do you know that, Sayel? An elder voice asked the first one. It was confirmed that our little watchdog at the front gate was defeated? Runaganga was defeated, Zomori? Apparently so, Yami. That's pathetic. What good is a guard if his can't keep pests out? The question, Neutra, is who is this intruder? And why are they here? Do you think Soul Society decided to invade Hueco Mundo? Don't be ridiculous. Yami. They're still recovering from learning that Aizen-sama was against them. They couldn't have been prepared to attack us so soon. Well, somebody did, Sayel. And if they were able to defeat Runaganga, then they at least have some skill. No Menos or Jillian would be capable of such a feat. And Ajuchas, then? It is highly doubtful that it would be a Vasto Lord. Allow me to answer that, my dear Espada. At once, all the other voice fell silent. This new soft, but more commanding voice spoke now. I have already sensed the Reiatsu of the intruder. As unique as it seems, the Reiatsu belongs to a human. Gasps were heard all around. A human? Aizen-sama, how could a human get to Hueco Mundo, let alone get all the way to Last Notches? A normal human can't even defeat a lowly Menos. That is what intrigues me, Neutra. This human appears to have potential. But he does not pose a threat to us. So I would like everyone to return to their quarters to await further instructions. I already have plans about to bring in this intruder. Everyone else is to stay out of the way. Is that understood? The silence was all the one called Aizen-sama needed to know. Good. As for Ben, he finally managed to make his way past out of the darkness. Only problem, he found himself in some kind of hallway which broke off in several different directions. Oh, man, Ben groaned. Why can't these things ever be easy for me, just once? But Ben knew that complaining wasn't gonna get him out of this. So he debated with himself on which direction he should go. He mumbled. There were so many directions to choose from. He could get lost and possibly be trapped in this strange place forever. Something tells me that it might be best if I just stick with going right. Ben decided. Determined to get home as soon as possible, Ben took off with a running start. Ben was getting frustrated now. He had been running for a long time and it looked like he was getting nowhere fast. The hallway just went on and on. Man, Ben whined. And though the straightforward way was always the best way. This was ironic, due to Ben's tendency to jump in without thinking. But there was something else on Ben's mind besides his annoyance at the unchanging scenery. He was having an uneasy feeling in the pit of his stomach. Like maybe he shouldn't have come here after all. But I need to get home, Ben told himself. Besides, if anything comes my way, I can handle it. Those are some pretty tough words, Nino, a voice said somewhere above Ben. I hope you are capable of backing them up. Ben spun around to see a man leaping across the planks above. A human? Before Ben could do anything, the man did a front flip. But he apparently messed up his timing and wound up slamming his stomach into the next plank. Groaning in man, the strange man fell to the ground. Ben frowned. Who in the world was this guy? The weird man rose to his feet. He was wearing white clothes, with a Spanish sense in them. His hair was arranged to look like horns like the devil. Ben said. Who are you? The man grinned as he took a fighting stance at Ben. Allow me to introduce myself, Nino. He said in a thick Spanish accent. I am Privaron Espada 103, Dordan Alessandro del Sacacchio. Ben stared at the man's long name. He also called himself something called a Privaron Espada. What in the world was that? I'm Ben Tennyson. He was all he could say. A pleasure to meet you, Ben Tennyson, Dordoni said. I hear you're the one who defeated Runaganga. Who? Ben asked in confusion. Oh, you mean that Sun guy? Of course, Dordoni said. You dared to come to the confines of Las Noches, which means you are brave. And you defeated Runaganga, which means that you have fighting skill, Nino. Skills I hope to see in combat. This threw Ben off. This guy honestly wanted to fight him? No offense to the guy, but he looked like Humongousaur or Forearms could easily knock him silly. Ben decided to try talking his way out. Look, Ben said. I don't want any trouble. I know this is hard to believe, but I just woke up and found myself here. Some portal opened up and dropped me here. I just want to find a way to get back home. Dordoni's eyes widened in surprise. This boy did not come here of his own free will. Then how did he get here? Was he not the one who defeated Runaganga? Dordoni knew there was only one way to find out. Even if you did not come of your own intention, Nino, he told Ben. You are an intruder. And Aizen-dono does not appreciate intruders. Aizen-dono? Ben asked. I thought his name was Aizen-sama. We all have our different titles of our master Aizen. Dordoni explained. But you will not get the chance to see him, Nino. Ben glared at him. So nothing I say can change your mind? If you manage to defeat me, Nino, Dordoni told him. Then perhaps I can convince Aizen to let you go home. This was a complete lie, but Dordoni was hoping that it would motivate Ben. Show me what you have, Nino. He thought. Ben let out a groan. This just wasn't his day. Or night. Or whatever. Fine, Ben groaned as he activated the Ultimatrix. But don't come crying to me when I kick your butt. Dordonii grinned again. I'm afraid your butt is the one that's going to be kicked, Nino. Ben grinned now as he activated the Ultimatrix. We'll see about that. He slammed the dial down. In a blinding flash of light, Ben was now a big, red, muscular being with 4 eyes and 4 massive arms. He wore garments similar to that of a gladiator and a wrestler. 4 arms, he roared. This took Dordonii by surprise. What in the world are you, Nino? He cried out in shock. 4 arms grinned as he cracked all his knuckles. I'm the one who's going to kick your butt. Wasting no time, 4 arms charged at Dordonii. 2 of his fists pulled back to punch him. But just as 4 arms was about to land a blow, Dordonii vanished. Who? 4 arms asked. He stopped his charge in confusion. Suddenly a foot struck him in the back and he went flying forward before crashing into the ground. Groaning, 4 arms got to his feet and turned around to see Dordonii behind him with a smug look on his face. One of the biggest rules of fighting, Nino, he said. Never judge your opponent by his appearance. 4 arms started. This guy had not only managed to dodge at XLR8 speed, but he kicked with enough force to send Ben flying as 4 arms. Who was this guy? Your form appears strong, Nino, Dordonii commented. But it is far too slow to be a threat to me. And here you were, bragging about going to kick my butt. 4 arms ignored him and charged again. This time, Dordonii leaped into the air and swung his leg down. 4 arms raised all 4 of his arms to block the attack, and still he found himself being pushed down. How in the world was this guy so strong? If that is all you can do, Nino, Dordonii said, then our fight is already over. Pity. I was hoping for more of a challenge. You want a challenge? 4 arms asked. I'll give you one. He touched the Ultimatrix dial. This time he transformed into a massive dinosaur. Humungosaur, he roared out. Dordonii laughed in excitement. Ah, so you do have more tricks up your sleeve, Nino. He complimented. But says doesn't always matter. No, Humungosaur agreed. But it sure does help. Humungosaur brought one giant fist down on where Dordonii was standing. But once again, the strange man vanished from sight. Humungosaur's fist merely hit the ground, creating a sizable hole in it. How is he doing that? Humungosaur asked aloud. That's when he felt a foot connect with his face. While it wasn't as hard as it was when he was 4 arms, it was enough to numb the side of his face. He growled when he saw Dordonii standing in front of him. It is my Sonido, Nino. He told Humungosaur. You will need more than size and brute strength if you want to get out of here alive, Nino. Humungosaur growled. Already this guy's stuck-up attitude was getting on his nerves. Fine. The guy wanted speed? He'd give him speed. He touched the dial again and turned into Jet Ray. Before Dordonii could do anything, Jet Ray fired neuroshock beams out of his eyes. The surprised Dordonii was blasted backwards and off his feet. How about that? Jet Ray asked, satisfied at watching his annoying opponent taking a blow. Much better, Nino. Dordonii complimented. Seems I was the one who underestimated you, this time. Just how many of those things can you turn into? Yeah, right, Jet Ray said. Like I'd tell you that. Ah, Dordonii laughed. Choosing to keep tricks up your sleeve, eh? Good, Nino, good. Now it's my turn to fight seriously. Jet Ray tensed up. Well. Dordonii yelled. Giralda. Jet Ray's eyes widened. Dordonii now had strange horn-like structures attached to his shoulders now. And wind was blowing out of them to form 2 strange snake-like creatures. Whoa, Jet Ray said. I didn't see that one coming. Dordonii laughed. It seems that we both are full of surprises, Ben Tennyson. Now let us see who truly is the stronger one, Nino. The two wind snakes shot forward at Jet Ray, who quickly maneuvered out of the way and began firing blasts out of his tail. Dordonii only gave minor grunts of pain. That's when one of the wind snakes slammed into Jet Ray from behind. But Jet Rat quickly recovered and charged at Dordonii. Very impressive, Nino. Instead of attacking the weapon, you choose to attack the wielder. You are very resourceful, Nino. But Dordonii sidestepped at the last minute, causing Jet Ray to miss him. Dordonii took advantage of this to slam a kick in Jet Ray. He slammed into the wall. But he quickly recovered and shot neuroshock blasts out of his eyes. But Dordonii had one of his wind snakes block the attack. But the I-beams managed to cut through the wind snake and shot into Dordonii's shoulder. He hissed in pain. Ha! Jet Ray laughed. Not so tough now, huh? Dordonii smiled at Jet Ray. I don't remember saying that I give up, Nino. Jet Ray grinned at him. What a coincidence. Neither did I. Dordonii sent his second snake charging at Jet Ray the same time the aerophibian fired his neuroshock blasts again. Although Jet Ray's blast went through it just like the last one, it apparently didn't kill it. Both snakes charged at Jet Ray, who flew away at the last second. This caused both wind snakes to crash into the wall. Jet Ray immediately took this opportunity to slam Dordonii into the ground. Give up, Dordonii, Jet Ray said. We don't need to fight. Dordonii looked at Jet Ray. Have you ever killed before, Ben Tennyson? This was one question that Jet Ray never expected. Heh, Dordonii said at Jet Ray's silence. Then you're as good as dead, Nino. Even if you defeat me, there are 10 far more powerful Arrancar waiting for you. They are the Espada, the most powerful of Azandono's army. To even have a hope of defeating them, you will have to become like the devil himself. Show any compassion in Hueco Mundo, and you will find a blade in your back. Jet Ray shivered at Dordonii's words. Now he was more determined than ever to get out of here. But there is no need for me to talk about you going up against the Espada, Dordonii continued. Because it looks like you won't even defeat me, Nino. Jet Ray glared at Dordonii. Oh no, he asked before firing neuroshock blasts point blank at Dordonii. It didn't kill the Priveron Espada, but the point-blank blast to his head certainly did hurt. Not to mention it blasted off a good amount of his frontal hair. Despite this, Dordonii just smiled. So, you want to fight dirty, Nino? I can do that. He slammed a fist into Jet Ray. The blow sent Jet Ray crashing into the ceiling. Grunting in pain, Jet Ray finally found himself fed up. Okay, he said. I'm starting to get really annoyed. Then strike me down, Nino. Dordonii yelled back to him. If you can. Fine by me. Jet Ray yelled. He zoomed down, dodging the wind snakes, and fired a triple blast out of his eyes and his tail. The blast struck Dordonii right in the face, the combined power knocking him off his feet and slamming into the wall. But Jet Ray didn't let off his attack. Once he was certain that the blast had frazzled Dordonii enough, he turned into Humungosaur. Nighty-night, Dordonii, Humungosaur said. He grabbed the frazzled Dordonii and body slammed him into the ground. He hoped that had been enough to knock Dordonii out, but Dordonii was still standing. Will you just stay down? He asked in annoyance. He considered becoming Ultimate Humungosaur, but decided against it. With no other choice, Humungosaur increased his size until there was hardly any room to move. He raised one gigantic fist and brought it down on Dordonii. The result was a massive crater in the ground. Tired, Ben turned back to normal. Cautiously, he noticed that Dordonii was dazed and stunned, but still not out. Man, Ben said. What is this guy made of? But Ben saw that this might be his chance. He had to get out now. The question was, which way should he go? Going forward would most likely bring an encounter with those Espada people he was told about. But going backwards would be nothing but a desert wasteland. As Ben considered his options, he decided to take his chances with the desert rather than meet anyone who was stronger than Dordonii. But that's when something struck Ben in the back of the neck and darkness covered his vision. Next thing Ben knew was voices. "He's just a boy. How did a boy get to Las Noches, let alone Hueco Mundo?" Two different said right after another. "He looks weak," said another voice. "I know Dordonii is nothing more than a Privron Espada, but I didn't think he was weak enough to get beaten by a kid. Appearances aren't everything, Neutra. You of all people should know that. Be quiet, Sayel or Isle. That's enough, Neutra." This last voice sent shivers down Ben's spine. It sounded soft and kind, but there's something hidden in the tone that made you frozen with fear. "I believe our guest has regained consciousness now," the voice said. "You can get up now." Personally, Ben thought it would be safer if he just played dead. But he had no idea who he was up against and didn't want to find out what they'd do if he didn't listen. So, Ben slowly got to his feet, his vision slowly returning to him. "Tell me, boy," the voice said. "What is your name?" "Ben Tennyson," Ben said automatically. He mentally cringed. In the movies, the hero doesn't give the villains his identity. Well, Ben Tennyson. Welcome to Las Noches. Ben could see now that he was in some kind of dimly lit, but extremely massive room. "Where am I?" Ben asked aloud. "You are in my throne room, Ben Tennyson." Ben turned around. In front of him was a large table with 10 different people sitting at it. Each one looking at Ben as if sizing him up. They were all wearing white clothing of various nature, and Ben could see swords at some of their sides. Ben's hand automatically reached for the Ultimatrix. These people were probably the Espada that Dordonii mentioned. "Ah," said a new, mocking voice. "No need to get hostile. We're all friends here." Ben looked at the end of the table to see a man sitting there. He had brown hair that was mostly slicked back except for a single strand. On either side of the man were two different people. One a period African American with some kind of visor-like object covering his eyes. The second man had silverish hair, a creepy smile, and eyes that were in slits so narrow that he couldn't guy if the guy's eyes were closed. "Hiya, Ben," the silver-haired man said. "How are you?" Ben didn't say anything. Mainly because he didn't know what to say. "So tell me, Ben Tennyson," the brown-haired man said. "What brings you to Hueco Mundo?" Gulping, Ben decided to go with honesty. This man had to be this Aizen-sama or Dono or whatever that he kept hearing about. "To be honest, I don't know," he admitted. "1 minute, I'm relaxing at Mr. Smoothie. Suddenly this hole opens up and the next thing I knew, I found myself here." "Really?" the man asked with interest and amusement. "How unfortunate." Aizen-sama said on the men. This one had long black hair, an eye patch, and a creepy smile that practically screamed danger as soon as Ben laid eyes on him. "Yes, Neutra," Aizen asked him. "Are you going to kill him?" the one called Neutra asked. Ben's eyes widened. "Aizen-sama," said a spectacled man with pinkish hair. "If you have no use for him, I would gladly use him for my experiments. I'm sure I could turn this human into something useful." "I wanna know how a kid got all the way into Las Noches," said a massive, muscular man with some sort of jawbone attached to his lower one. "And how the heck this guy managed to beat Dordonii?" "Yes," Aizen nodded. "I am curious as to how young Ben Tennyson managed to do so. Would you mind sharing with us, Ben?" Ben naturally took a step back. The massive one got out from his chair. "If you want, Aizen-sama, I can make this kid tell us." "Go ahead, Yami," Aizen said. "But try to not kill him." "Heh," the one called Yami sneered. "That looks like it shouldn't be a problem." He began walking towards Ben. Quickly, Ben activated the Ultimatrix. "I don't think so," he cried before slamming down on the dial. "Humongosaur," he roared. Well, that got the attention of everybody in the room. They just saw a human boy turn into some kind of dinosaur as big as Yami. What the? Was all Yami could get out as Humungosaur crashed his fist into Yami's face. The blow was enough to knock Yami off his feet and sent him slamming on the table. The others merely watched as Yami got back up to his feet, extremely mad. That does it, kid! He raised his fist as if to punch Humungosaur. Suddenly a sort of red light formed around his fist. He then punched the air, but the red ball that had formed around his fist shot out as a ball of some kind of energy and slammed into Humungosaur. Humungosaur groaned in pain as it hit him. You ticked me off, kid! Yami sent him slamming on the table. The others merely watched as Yami got back up to his feet, extremely mad. That does it, kid! He raised his fist as if to punch Humungosaur. Suddenly a sort of red light formed around his fist. He then punched the air, but the red ball that had formed around his fist shot out as a ball of some kind of energy and slammed into Humungosaur. Humungosaur groaned in pain as it hit him. You ticked me off, kid! Yami said. Now I'm gonna pound you within an inch of your life. He began bombarding Humungosaur with this strange fist attacks. Humungosaur couldn't even get close enough to lay a blow. He knew that he needed some firepower. Time to go ultimate, he yelled. Twisting the Ultimatrix dial, he slammed it again. This time, his body became wider, green, and more like an Ankylosaurus. Ultimate Humungosaur, he yelled. He took advantage of Yami's stupefied look to turn his hands into missile launchers and began blasting Yami. The blasts didn't really do significant damage to him, but they were hitting his head and face, so he couldn't really do much. Humungosaur saw his chance and charged forward. By the time Yami could see anything, Ultimate Humungosaur slammed both of his fists into Yami's gut. The blow sent him crashing back into the table. Yami got back up angrily. Snarling, he was about to pull his sword out when... That's enough, Yami, Aizen said. Yami and Ben both looked at Aizen, who continued to have that smile on his face. I see now that young Ben is more than capable of defending himself, he said. Then he turned to look at Ben. That is quite a unique power you have, Ben. I am impressed. You may change back now. Ultimate Humungosaur didn't budge. Aizen-sama gave you an order? Yami yelled. It's okay, Yami, Aizen said while sipping from a cup of tea. Due to our reception, it is understandable for Ben to be cautious. Tell me, Ben. Am I correct in assuming that your Humungosaur, as you called it, is not the only thing you can turn into? Ultimate Humungosaur's eyes widened in surprise. You defeated both Runaganga and Dordonii, Aizen explained. That form alone could not have defeated them. And am I correct in assuming that your power comes from that device that was on your human wrist? Ultimate Humungosaur snarled. You truly are unique, Ben Tennyson. I have never seen a power like yours. I believe you could have a use for you. What? The one called Neutra yelled. You'll want this worthless human to join us? Worthless? Aizen asked with a smile. I think not. Young Ben could truly be helpful. Look, Ultimate Humungosaur said. I appreciate the offer, but I just want to get home. Ultimate Humungosaur tensed when he noticed that some of the Espada, namely Neutra and some blue-haired guy, were snickering at this. Aizen, however, was focused on Ben. I have something I need help with, Ben, Aizen said. If you help me, I can return you to your home. Ben turned back to normal. But he was still uneasy. Aizen looked friendly enough, but he had allowed that Yami guy to try and beat him up. Did Aizen know that he could take of himself? Either way, Ben wanted to go home, and if this Aizen guy wanted Ben to do anything shady, he would just refuse to do it. He had the power of the Ultimatrix at this side. He had defeated countless foes and always came out on top. Not even Aizen and his Espada would be able to defeat him. All right, he said. I'll help you. Aizen smiled what seemed to be a genuine friendly smile. Wonderful. Welcome to Hueco Mundo, Ben Tennyson. This story takes place during the events of Ben 10 Ultimate Alien and before the Arrancar saga began. It was completely true to say that Ben Tennyson had his share of weirdness throughout his life. For one thing, finding the Omnitrix. Next, unlocking the various alien heroes that he could access with it. And after that, becoming a hero who had saved the entire universe. Then, gaining the Ultimatrix in place of the Omnitrix, and being a celebrity. But not even all of that could prepare Ben for the adventure that he was now experiencing. Somehow he had wound up in a desert called Hueco Mundo. Now he was in Las Noches, a giant dome that, as far as he knew, was the only building in this vast wasteland. Now he was agreeing to help its ruler, a man named Aizen, in exchange for going home. Shortly after Ben agreed to help Aizen, he was introduced to everyone else. The silver-haired man went by the name of Jin Ichimaru. The African man went by the name of Kaname Tozen. After them, Ben was introduced to the other 10 people. As Ben predicted, they were the Espada that Dordoniai had told him about. According to Aizen, they were ranked from 1 to 10. The lower the number, the stronger that person was. The Espada introduced themselves from 10 to 1. The first one, Ben was already familiar with. The massive one called Yami. He stared at Ben with a desire to rip the teenager to shreds for humiliating him after Ben had given him a pounding as Ultimate Humongosaur. The look on Yami's face clearly said that he and Ben still had a score to settle. What interested Ben was the fact that Yami was number 10 of the Espada. That meant he was the weakest? This didn't go well with Ben. He had to go Ultimate in order to even land a blow on him. Just how much stronger were the others? The next Espada to greet Ben was tall and had a white mask with 8 holes over his face. His uniform was more of a dress garb and his jacket was rather frilly. "Greetings, Ben Tennyson," the being said in a guttural voice. "We are Espada number 9. Call us Aranero. It will be interesting to work with you." Ben's eyes widened. As Aranero said his name, his voice had become high and squeaky. Ben first felt like laughing, but changed his mind when Aranero said it would be nice to work with him. Was it his imagination or did Aranero sound hungry when he said that? And what did he mean by we? Did Aranero have split personalities? Ben tensed up when the next person walked forward. His uniform was far plainer, wearing a long shirt that covered his entire body and even up to his neck. His pink hair and glasses caused Ben to remember that this guy was the one who volunteered to experiment on him. Naturally, Ben took a step back. "Don't be afraid of me, Ben Tennyson," the man said with a smile. "I'm the 8 Espada, Sayelaporo Grands. Forgive me for my brash attitude earlier. I had no idea that a human could be so interesting." Ben Visible shivered at this. The way Sayel said that and was looking at him was causing Ben's brain to scream use the Ultimatrix, but Ben didn't want to ruin his chance of getting home, so he endured it as he shook Sayel's outstretched hand. The next man was big and muscular, but not even close to Yami. The way he wore his clothes made Ben think of martial arts robes. The man had a necklace made of what looked like claws or fangs, and he had a mohawk made out of bones on his bald head. He had yellowish eyes and black markings on his face. "I am the 7th Espada, Zomri Leroux," the man said in a calm voice. "Be honored, Ben Tennyson, that you have the privilege of being helpful to Aizen-sama." Ben nodded his head, as Zomri did not offer his hand out like Sayel hand. But his attention was drawn to the next person who introduced himself. Now here was a familiar feeling. The feeling of danger. The feeling Ben got whenever he battled foes like Vilgax or the High Breed. This guy was trouble. He had wild blue hair and teeth that were like fangs. He had something that looked like the fragment of some kind of jawbone on the right side of his face. For some reason, the words street punk came to mind. "Grimjo Jagajaques," the blue-haired man said. "The 6th Espada. Hope you got some better moves, 'cause anybody can beat Yami." And without waiting for Ben to say anything, Grimjo walked back to his seat. The next one was the one called Neutra. His uniform had a bizarre hood that had a spoon-like appearance and he had boots that curled at ends. Had it been anyone else, Ben would have laughed. But Ben noticed the massive scythe-like thing that Neutra was carrying and knew it would be best to keep his mouth shut. Neutra Giruga, Neutra said with a sneer. The fifth espada. So, Ben. Anything in that crap on your wrist that's a challenge? Ben's eyes narrowed. So this guy was mocking him? Plenty of them, Ben said, this time, not backing down from Neutra. Neutra's sneer merely widened in pleasure. Good, Neutra said. Looks like you and I are gonna be spending a lot of time together. Ben snarled as Neutra took his seat. Trying to keep his anger under control, Ben turned to see who was next. Once he looked, he did a double take to make sure he wasn't seeing things. This next guy was pure white. Like somebody had crafted a living person out of chalk. He had messy black hair, a black upper lip, and green eyes that had similarities to the eyes of a cat. Black lines like tears went down from the bottom of his eyelids to the bottom of his face. He had a helmet-like headwear on the left side of his head. I am Ulquiorra Cypher, the man said in a pure emotionless voice. I am the fourth espada. Ben didn't know what to think of Ulquiorra. Due to his lack of emotions, it was hard for Ben to figure out what Ulquiorra thought of him. The next person who walked up caused Ben's face to immediately burn with embarrassment as he tried to look anywhere but at the woman in front of him. She had dark, exotic skin with blonde hair and green eyes. But that wasn't what was embarrassing Ben. Her shirt covered the upper half of her body and even her mouth, but it didn't completely cover the one thing that was making Ben feel redder than a tomato. The lower part of her chest was more than half exposed and Ben was trying hard not to stare at her. He felt so embarrassed. Tia Harrible, the woman said in a calm voice. The third espada. It is comforting to meet someone who has manners, Benjamin Tennyson. Ben's eyes widened in surprise as he saw Harrible walk back to her seat. Neutra scoffed at her as if he thought she was inferior, despite the fact that she was the higher ranking. The second to last person was an old man with something that looked like a star-like crown on his head. A scar ran down one of his eyes. He looked at Ben as if he was a gum wad that had gotten stuck to the bottom of his shoe. Barragan Luzenban, the old man said gruffly and uncaringly. Second espada. He shot one last look of contempt at Ben before sitting down. Anger boiled within Ben and he seriously considered going wrath on the old guy. But his attention was drawn to the last guy. He had shoulder-length brown hair and a faded goatee. He also had a look between boredom and sleepiness on his face. Coyote Stark, the man said drowsily. The Primera Espada. Sorry about this, but I'm exhausted right now. Ben raised an eyebrow. This guy was supposed to be the number one espada? He looked like he was gonna collapse and fall asleep at any minute. Ben watched as Stark took his spot next at the table. Now, Ben, Aizen spoke. You have been introduced to all the espada. Now it's your turn. Ben raised an eyebrow at Aizen. Huh? He asked. Aizen smiled at him. I would like very much to see all the things that you can turn into. Distrust filled Ben's mind. The last time he had shown off his alien forms, he had nearly been killed by a giant robot. He was not in the mood to go through anything that was even remotely similar. I see that you still have trouble trusting me, Ben, Aizen said with that eerie smile on his face. Oh, Ben said. It's not you personally, Aizen. Ben noticed some of the espada were looking at him in annoyance that he did not say Sama at the end. It sounded Japanese. Was Sama some kind of word of respect for a superior? I understand, Ben, Aizen said. But you have nothing to fear from us. We will not hurt you. Ben looked at Aizen doubtfully. This contradicted what Dordonii had told him during their fight. I understand your doubt, Ben, Aizen continued, noticing the doubtful look on Ben's face. We have not been the most gracious of hosts to you. That's a way to put it. Ben thought, remembering Runuganga, Dordonii, and how Aizen had allowed Yami to attack him. Benjamin, the one named Tozen, said. When Aizen says you are safe, that means you are. Ben couldn't figure Tozen out. But he sure felt better around Tozen than that other guy Jin. Tozen was the only person he was certain did not look down on him. Seeing as how there was no way out of this, Ben looked at Aizen. "All right," he said with a nod of his head. "I'll do it." "Thank you, Ben," Aizen said. Aizen-sama, Sayel suddenly perked up, causing all heads to turn at him. Ben had a sick feeling in the pit of his stomach. "Yes, Sayel?" Aizen asked his espada. Having Ben here merely show us his transformations is absolutely no fun at all. "Why don't we see his forms in action?" Ben gave out a low groan. Sayel was going to pit him against who knew what, just to see all that Ben could do. Already he was feeling like some kind of guinea pig. "Why not?" the one called Grimjo said. "Might as well see if the kid can do anything." "Did you not see the boys fight with Yami, Grimjo?" Ulquiorra asked him. He was capable of trading blows with him. While it was only Yami who he was fighting, the boy does have some amount of potential. Now that really burned Ben up. Ulquiorra was looking down on it, but admitting that there was a chance that Ben was slightly more than dead weight. Yami was ticked off too, but for an entirely different reason than Ben. "He got lucky!" Yami roared. "I didn't expect the kid to turn into that humungo whatever he called it." "I believe Ben referred to the transformation as Humungosaur, Yami," Sayel told him. Yami just snarled at Sayel. "Well, Sayel," Aizen said. "I agree with you. I'd like to see what young Ben is capable of. A demonstration of his powers would be an excellent idea." Ben's shoulders drooped. "You want me to fight more people?" he whined. This took everyone by surprise. They had seen people react in many ways to Aizen, begging, crying, yelling, cursing. But no one had ever whined to Aizen like a little kid. That was definitely a first. "Don't worry, Ben," Aizen said to him. "I just wish to see your forms in action. I will intervene before anything serious should occur." Ben looked at Aizen doubtfully. It sure didn't seem that way when he allowed Yami to attack him. Yami got up. "Aizen-sama, I would be more than happy to test the runt." Ben glared at Yami. "I'd like to see you try," he said. "I was totally kicking your butt as Humungosaur." Yami turned at Ben. "You got lucky, that's all," he roared. "I'm gonna squash you flat." He moved towards Ben. "Please sat back down, Yami," Aizen said in a very calm voice. Yami instantly froze, looked at Aizen, then grumpily returned to his seat. "Now," Aizen continued. "The question here is, who do we use to test Ben? We know that he can hold his own against the Priveron Espada. It is difficult to say at the moment how Ben ranks amongst you, my Espada. We know he can at least go against Yami." "Aizen-sama," Tozen said. "Why not allow Benjamin to battle some of the other Priveron Espada?" Aizen smiled. "That would be a perfect idea. Since Ben has already battled Dordonii, I will select new opponents for Ben. Jin, send for Siruchi Sandawichi and Gantenbane Mosqueda." Jin nodded. "Of course," he said in eerily cheerful tone that gave Ben the willies. So, Ben decided to start conversation. "What's the difference between Espada and Priveron Espada?" "I can explain, young Benjamin," Tozen said. "Priveron Espada are those who used to be Espada, but were demoted for various reasons. When an Espada is demoted, they receive a 3-digit number and are replaced by a new Arrancar." "By the way," Ben said, "what exactly is an Arrancar anyway?" This above all things caught Aizen's interest. Ben had no idea about Hueco Mundo, Last Notches, Arrancar, and it was safe that assumed that he didn't have any idea what hollows were. And yet, Ben had that strange device on his wrist with untold power. Aizen contemplated how he could use that power in his plan. At that moment, Jin came back with 2 other people. One was a young woman with purplish hair tied in bundled pigtails. She wore a puffy-looking dress with wings at the back that made Ben think of a butterfly. In her hands was a strange weapon that looked like a giant yo-yo attached to a sword handle. The other was an African-American man wearing a big orange afro and a white outfit that made disco came to Ben's mind. Aizen-sama, the woman said. Who is this little kid? Little kid? Ben asked, offended. Calm yourself, Ben, Aizen said to him. Then he turned his attention to the woman. Tsuruchi, this is Ben Tennyson. The one who gave Dordoniai such a hard time. Both Tsuruchi and the man's eyes widened in shock. They looked at Ben before looking at Aizen. Aizen-sama, the man said. Are you sure this is not some kind of joke? Ben frowned at the man's words. It is no joke, Gantenbane, Aizen replied. This boy managed to defeat Runaganga, battle Dordoniai and hold his own against Yami. Both Gantenbane and Tsuruchi stared at Ben. They briefly looked at Yami, whose ticked-off face confirmed Aizen's words. There is more to young Ben than meets the eye, he said. And I would like to see what he is capable of. This got Tsuruchi and Gantenbane's attention. So Aizen was using them just to test out this kid? I'll go, Tsuruchi said in a huff. She didn't like what Aizen was using them for, so she was gonna make sure that this Ben Tennyson wouldn't be able to so much as lift a pinky. Ben, on the other hand, was considering his options. Appearance-wise, Tsuruchi didn't look all that intimidating. But he had learned from his battle with Dordoniai that appearances didn't mean anything here. So? Ben asked. Where are you going to fight? Aizen smiled. I believe this room is big enough. Sure was. But Ben was surprised that they were going to fight with everyone else here. You may begin when you're ready, Aizen told the two combatants. Tsuruchi grinned. I'm ready now, she cried, swinging her sword. Ben barely had time to think as the giant yo-yo shot at him. He managed to dodge it as it crashed and made a hole in the wall. Thinking quickly, Ben activated the Ultimatrix and switched to Jet Ray. The form had helped him against one Priveron Espada. No harm in trying it with another one. He slammed the dial down. Jet Ray, he yelled after transforming. Needless to say, Tsuruchi's eyes bugged out when she saw what happened. What the? She started to say. That's all she got out when Jet Ray fired neuroshock beams out of his eyes, striking Tsuruchi right in the stomach. The blasts knocked her off feet and crashing into the ground. What's going on here? Gantenbane asked, rubbing his eyes several times to make sure that he wasn't seeing things. Young Ben has the power to take the form of various creatures, Aizen explained. Marvelous, Sayel said while licking his eyes. A sick look in his eyes. Simply marvelous. The other Espada gave Sayel looks of disgust and contempt. Tsuruchi got back up and glared at Jet Ray with pure hate. All right, you freak, she yelled to him. I'll teach you to mess with me. She raised her sword. Rip off. Golondrina. Jet Ray's eyes were huge as he saw gigantic wings sprout out of Tsuruchi's back. The feathers were black and had crescent-shaped. She now had some kind of headdress on that was beak. Like with a feathery manet. It covered most of her body. Her arms became claw-like and Jet Ray could see a tail swishing behind her. Sheesh, Jet Ray said. And I thought Dordoniai was weird. Shrieking like a banshee, Tsuruchi flew at Jet Ray. Quickly, Jet Ray flew into the air and fired his neuroshock beams again. But this time, Tsuruchi shielded herself with her wings. The lasers struck her wings, but not even a scratch was on them. This is bad, Jet Ray observed. Tsuruchi unfolded her wings and gave Ben a sadistic smile. Yes, you little creep, she said. This is very bad. Jet Ray was about to attack again, but his plans were delayed when suddenly the feathers on Tsuruchi's wings came off and flew at him. Jet Ray managed to dodge the attack, but he looked behind and saw that they had managed to slice through one of the pillars in the room like it was nothing. Oh man, Jet Ray said. If I let even one of those things hit me, I'm dead. Then an idea came to him. So I won't. The other Espada heard him. Sayel's eyes lit up in excitement. Yes, Ben, he said in a low voice. Do it. Jet Ray touched the Ultimatrix and transformed. This time he had become a form that looked like a humanoid moth with a black and blue-colored body with white spots. Its eyes were bulbous and green. Overall, he had a rather spooky appearance. "Big chill," he whispered in an eerie voice. Tsuruchi was not impressed despite the transformation. "So you just look different," she said. "As if that's gonna help you." She fired her wings again. She knew that this guy Big Chill, as he called himself, would just dodge it. But she loved watching her prey struggle. But rather than dodge out of the way, Big Chill merely floated there with his arms folded. Tsuruchi stared. Was this new form stupid or something? She shrugged as she saw the feathers flew at him. But rather than cut up Big Chill like they should have, Tsuruchi saw her feathers go right through him. As if he was just a mere mist. Her jaw dropped and her eyes widened. Above her, Big Chill gave her a spooky grin. "What's the matter?" he asked in that creepy voice. "Didn't expect that?" Big Chill took a deep breath and fired an icy mist right at Tsuruchi. Tsuruchi had been too speechless to move, so there was nothing she could do as the icy blast struck her. Ice began to form and encase her body. "Take a chill pill," Big Chill said to her, then chuckled at his own pun. Tsuruchi snarled. This guy was making a fool out of her. Now he was definitely going to pay. "That is enough," Aizen said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at Aizen, who was eyeing Big Chill with great interest. "I have seen enough of this battle," Aizen explained while still looking at Ben. "If I allowed this to go any further, I would lose one of my soldiers and my new friend." Ben didn't feel comfortable with Ben calling him friend. And Tsuruchi was a soldier? A soldier for what? But Aizen continued. "Those were two impressive forms, Ben. Your first form, Jet Ray, seems to favor skill in flight and speed. Due to his appearance, I assume that he has underwater capabilities?" "Yes," Big Chill replied. "I can use him for air and underwater." Aizen nodded his approval. "A very useful form. Now to discuss your current form. I believe you called it Big Chill?" Big Chill nodded. "This form is definitely a prize," Sayel said while looking at Big Chill with an almost hungry look. "Intangibility and ice powers. It's an excellent combination." "Very sneaky of you, kid," Jin said with that smile. "If you had used that in the beginning, I bet even Yami over here wouldn't have stood a chance." It took a moment for the comment to register in Yami's brain. "Hold on a minute," he said. "Are you telling me that you think the kid was going easy on me?" Jin turned his head at Yami. If it was even possible, his smile had gotten wider. "That's exactly what I'm saying, Yami." Yami's hands balled into fists. His face screamed bloody murder as he looked at Big Chill, who was simply floating in the air as he waited for something to happen. "Just you wait, punk," Yami told himself. "I'm gonna get you good." His attention was drawn when Aizen spoke again. "Now, Ben," he said. "I would like to see your skills against Gantenbane now." Big Chill looked over at Gantenbane. He didn't look very threatening, so he couldn't tell if he should use a different form or just stay as Big Chill. However, Aizen suddenly said, "I would like to see as many forms as I can, so I would for you to use any form aside from Humongosaur, Jet Ray, and Big Chill, please." Big Chill groaned, once again another action that no one had ever used in front of Aizen before. He was robbed of 3 of his best forms. "Fine then," he said. He touched the dial. This time, he became a 7-foot-tall plant creature with a head that looked like an orange flame. "Swamp fire," he cried in a nasally voice. Sayel licked his lips. "My, how interesting," he said as he looked swamp fire up and down. Ben resisted the urge to blast Sayel. That guy was just getting grosser and grosser. But Ben struggled to ignore him as he turned to face his new opponent. Gantenbane took a fighting stance. "You did pretty good to hold your own against Ordonei and Tsuruchi," he said. "In the name of God, let us have a good fight." Swampfire got a good look at the man's weapons. They were twin blades that were on either side of the handles that he held in his hands. Sparks connected from the blades. "Let's go," Gantenbane said. Swampfire made the first move. He raised his hands and shot streams of fire out. But in a flash, Gantenbane had vanished. "How is he doing that?" Swampfire groaned, reminded of when Dordonii had been using that move. If he remembered correctly, Dordonii had called it Sonido. That's when Swampfire was aware of some kind of low boom noise behind him. He turned around to see Gantenbane behind him. "Too slow," the Privarian Espada said. He punched Swampfire in the gut, and his eyes widened when his fist punched right through him. He could feel nothing but plant life and gunk as he did. Grimacing in disgust, he noticed that Swampfire just looked at him as if he hadn't been hit at all. Then he grinned. "Nice try," Swampfire said before slamming his fist into Gantenbane's face. The blow knocked him back, but he quickly regained his balance. He looked at the hole his fist had made. Then he did a double take when he saw the wound instantly close up. "High-speed regeneration," he gasped. This caught Ulquiorra's interest. So this boy had a form with regenerative properties. Perhaps the boy did have potential. Gantenbane scoffed. "Just cause you can regenerate doesn't mean you'll win, Tennyson. You got firepower, but it's useless against my Sonido." Swampfire frowned. That Sonido was become a big bother. He had to find a way to immobilize Gantenbane. "Then let's try this," he said, pulling some seeds out of his body and throwing them on the ground near Gantenbane's feet. Suddenly the seeds grew into massive plants that wrapped themselves around Gantenbane's body. He struggled as best he could, but the vine soon covered his entire body, making him unable to use his Sonido or even move at all. "Now that's more like it," Swampfire said. "That takes care of you." "You think so, Tennyson?" Gantenbane asked. "I'm afraid you're wrong." The vines which encased Gantenbane suddenly exploded. Swampfire covered his eyes to block any flying debris. When he uncovered them, he saw that Gantenbane had changed. His arms were now covered in strange plating that were big and roundish, and they went all the way down to his hands, where the blade weapons had become like dragon heads. Ben could also see an armored tail from behind him. "Take a good look, man," Gantenbane said. "This here is Dragna. Now the real fight starts." He put his fists together and shot a blast of energy at Swampfire. Swampfire tried to dodge, but he hadn't moved out of the way in time, causing his arm to be blasted off. Grunting at what happened, Swampfire made a vine grow out of his shoulder, attach to the severed limb, and pull it back to his body. "Not bad," Gantenbane said as he saw this. "That's a pretty handy form you've got there." Swampfire's response was a blast of fire. But Gantenbane merely shielded himself with his armored platings. "Sorry, kid," Gantenbane said. "But you don't stand a chance now." Swampfire frowned. He considered going Ultimate Swampfire, but thought against it. He realized what he could use instead. Touching the Ultimatrix dial, Swampfire transformed again. This time he was a small, pure white being with a wide head and green eyes. "Echo, echo," he called out in a mechanical-sounding voice. "You making fun of me, Tennyson?" Gantenbane asked as he looked at Echo Echo. "You expect to beat me with that puny form?" "Didn't anyone ever tell you, Gantenbane?" Echo Echo asked in his mechanical voice. "Divide and conquer." Everyone's eyes were on Echo Echo as suddenly more and more of him appeared. Then, all the copies looked at Gantenbane and released a powerful sonic blast at the Privron Espada. Gantenbane howled in pain as he covered his eyes. But the sonic wave did more than that. There was enough Echo Echoes to send Gantenbane crashing into the wall, pinned down by the hammer of sound that he was being struck with. While his armor plating protected him from physical attacks, not even he could protect himself against sound. Grunting, Gantenbane managed to use his Sonido to appear behind the small army Ben had made. He fired an energy blast, which sent the Echo Echoes flying. They responded with another sonic scream at him. But since they were scattered now, Gantenbane had been hit by an all-angled sonic blast. He fell to the ground, shaking his head to clear his now scrambled senses. Had enough yet? The lead Echo asked. Sayel looked like he was on the brink of having a heart attack. More. He resisted screaming aloud. More. I must see more. Gantenbane got back up to his feet. Shaking his head, he grinned at Echo. You're pretty good, kid, he told Ben. And this is a good match. Thank you, Gantenbane, Aizen said suddenly. That will be all for today. Gantenbane and Echo both looked at each other. Then, much to Echo's surprise, Gantenbane held out his hand. Thanks for going all out with me, Ben Tennyson. You're a strong fighter. Echo smiled. Thanks, he said as he shook Gantenbane's hand. You too. With that, all the Echoes joined together and Ben turned back to normal. With that smile on his face, Aizen turned to look at his espada. So, my espada, he said. What are your thoughts on this? Yami scoffed. So the kid managed to wound some lousy Priveron. Big deal. I'd kill him easy. Ben glared. Funny, he said. I seem to remember beating you up. Yami snarled at Ben, but backed off as he knew that Aizen wouldn't like it. Araniro spoke up. Ben has our respect, he said in the high-pitched voice. Then he spoke in the guttural voice. It would be good to keep him around. Sadly, that didn't boost Ben's confidence. Especially with the way Araniro said that. I agree with Araniro, said Sayel. It was so wonderful to see all those forms and powers Ben showed us today. And I'm certain that the ones we've seen are just the tip of the iceberg. I'm anxious to see more. Zomari spoke now. If Aizen-sama approves of Ben Tennyson, then I will stand by Aizen-sama's decision. Grimjo yawned. I don't care what you do with the kid. Let me know if he turns into something worth fighting. Neutra spoke up. It looks like little Ben here might save me from boredom if he's got some good forms in that wrist thing of his. Ulquiorra spoke next. Ben Tennyson has displayed a wide variety of forms, each with their own different powers. I can see some uses for that. Haribal was silent for a moment. Benjamin has displayed resourcefulness that is to be admired. He chose forms that would give him an advantage over his opponent when the odds were against him. This shows that Benjamin also has good knowledge of his forms and how to use them properly. Barragan, on the other hand, merely remained silent and refused to even look at Ben. Stark scratched his head before speaking. He's okay, he admitted. But that Echo form is just too noisy for my taste. Do me a favor, Ben, and make sure not to use that around me, okay? Ben said, really uncertain how to respond to that. Sure. Stark nodded. Thank you. Aizen now turned his smile at Ben. It would seem that the Espada are in favor of you, Ben Tennyson. And I think spending time with them will be good for you to understand last notches and any other questions you might have. Thanks, Ben said to him. Aizen then looked at everyone. I think it would be best if Ben was made a fraction. This drew attention from both Ben and the Espada. Most gave Aizen looks of surprise. Sayel looked at Aizen with a look of glee on his face. Barragan, on the other hand, was looking at Aizen with fury. Ben could even see the old man's body shaking as if he was going to explode. He quickly looked away and back at Aizen. A fraction? Ben asked him. What is that? Aizen turned that smile of his in Ben's direction. A fraction is one who serves under an Espada, Aizen explained to Ben. And I think you would make an excellent fraction. I agree, Sayel said while standing. In fact, I would like to request that Ben joins my fraction. With my genius and Ben's forms, we would make a great team. Ben was thinking the exact opposite. He didn't want to be in the same room alone with Sayel. Even with the power of Ultimatrix, he was still disgusted with the pink-haired man. Normally I would allow you to do so, Sayel, Aizen said to him. However, this time I will allow Ben to decide which Espada he wants to serve under. Sayel had a brief look of disappointment on his face as he sat back down. Ben, on the other hand, was just so confused. Ben, Aizen said. I know this is something new for you, but you have my guarantee that whoever you chose will teach you all there is to know here. Ben looked at Aizen. Then back at the Espada. Now, Ben Tennyson, Aizen said. Who will you choose? Was all that came out of Ben's mouth. Aizen nodded his head. I understand, Ben. You need some time to make your decision. You don't need your answer right away. I will give you time to think it over. Tozen, may you take Ben to one of the spare rooms, please? Of course, Aizen-sama, Tozen said with a bow. He walked toward the hallway at the end of the room. Come with me, Benjamin. Blinking in confusion for a moment, Ben followed Tozen. They were in a pure white hallway. It reminded Ben of the hallway that he was in when he first reached Last Notches. You are unique, Benjamin Tennyson. And Harable is right. You are resourceful. Tell me, Benjamin. How old are you? Ben thought. 16. Tozen said. Interesting. Tozen went over to one of the doors and opened it. Here you are, Benjamin. These shall be your quarters now. I will be back shortly to see if you need anything. With that, Tozen walked away. Meanwhile, Ben looked around his room. It was rather plain. It had a bed and couches to sit on, but that was about it. Nothing else. But as Ben thought about it, this place didn't seem very high-tech. But he had witnessed enough of those Espada and Priveron Espada to know that they were anything but primitive. And now Ben had to choose which of those Espada he had to be a fraction. Now, he had to think which one he wanted to work with. It was like picking your science partner in class. Only these people were a lot more difficult to handle than Ben's regular classmates. Ben groaned. What to do? At that moment, Ben's stomach grumbled. He realized that he hadn't eaten in a while. I wonder if Last Notches has chili fries. As usual, Stark was snoozing in his chambers. He had to admit that it had been quite a day when that human Ben Tennyson showed up. Stark bet that not even Aizen could have predicted that Ben could turn into all those creatures they saw him use. Stark wasn't sure how, but he had a feeling that Aizen was going to find some use for Ben. His thoughts were interrupted by the fact that he felt someone grab a very private part of his body. With a yelp of pain and indignation, Stark shot upright and was gasping for breath. He was greeted by a childish laugh. Grumbling, Stark turned to look at the one responsible for waking him up. Standing there was a little girl wearing a very revealing outfit with a horned helmet that covered her head and one of her eyes. Any normal person would have freaked out by the hole in her chest, but holes like that were normal for the people of Hueco Mundo. The girl grinned. About time you woke up, Stark, the girl said. Stark frowned at her. Hello, Lilinette. What did you wake me up for this time? It was Lilinette's turn to frown now. You know why, she said. Something happened today, and I want to know what. News is going around about some kind of intruder who was able to hold his own against the Priveron Espada. Stark groaned again. Figure she'd find out. What a pain. Give me a break, okay? Stark asked as he started to doze off. But that was delayed when Lilinette kicked him right in the rear. Oh. You're not going back to sleep until you tell me what in the world is going on here. Lilinette yelled. Give me a break, Lilinette, Stark groaned. I'm not in the mood. Lilinette continued Stark's rear over and over. Tell me, you jerk. Tell me. All right, all right. Stark yelled. Lilinette stopped kicking him and simply folded her arms. Well, she asked. Someone came to Hueco Mundo, Stark told her. A kid by the name of Ben Tennyson. Lilinette's jaw dropped. A human? A human? What's a human doing in Hueco Mundo? How should I know? Stark asked her back. According to Ben, he's not even sure how he got here. Aizen-sama promised Ben to return him home if he helped us. Lillinette's eyes softened. Does he even know what we are? Stark looked at the ground. No, he admitted. Ben's never heard of Arrancar. Safe to say that he has no idea what hollows are. Lillinette shook her head. Poor kid, she said softly. Doesn't even know what he's gotten himself into. Baragan, on the other hand, was feeling nothing but contempt and disgust towards Ben. And how could Aizen allow a measly human to become a fraction? That was a disgrace. In Baragan's quarters, he was greeted by some of his own fraction. A masked, blonde-haired man approached him. Is something troubling you, Lord Baragan? He asked. Baragan merely looked at the man before finally speaking. Yes, he said. Aizen has allowed some human kid to become a fraction. Baragan's own fraction exchanged shocked looks with each other. Then one of them, a rather massive man with a calm face, spoke. Why would Aizen have a human in last notches, let alone allow one to become a fraction? According to the brat, Baragan told him. He just found himself here. And Aizen's allowing him to become a fraction because the brat has the power to turn into different creatures. This caught all of his fraction's interest. Is he a Shinigami? Asked a short male with black hair and wearing what appeared to be a feline skull on his head. No, Vega, Baragan said. It is for certain that the brat is no Shinigami. But if that's the case, where did he acquire those powers? But Baragan turned to face his fraction. Not that it matters. I intend to show Aizen that the brat is not wanted and not needed. And that is where you all come in. Harrible had gone to greet her own 3 fraction and told them about the situation. This is ridiculous, shouted one of them. It was a tomboyish girl with short blue hair and different colored eyes. She also had a horn-like ornament attached to her head, giving her a unicorn-like appearance. What's wrong, Apache? Asked the second of Harrible's fraction. This one had dark skin like Harrible and long brown hair. Her clothing was similar to that of an Amazon on her muscle-toned body. Scared the big bad human is gonna hurt you? Huh? Apache laughed. Sounds to me like you're the one who's scared, Mila Rose. But that's hardly surprising since you're just a big coward. What did you just say? Mila Rose yelled at Apache. The two glared and growled at each other until they were interrupted by a girl with long hair, 3 dots under one of her eyes, and having one of her long-sleeved arms covering her mouth. Stop it, you two, she said to them. For once, can't I just have a nice day without having to put up with your constant bickering? Since you're both obviously scared of this human, there's no point in trying to hide it. Shut up, Sunday through Sunday. Mila Rose and Apache both yelled. No one was talking to you, anyway. Apache snorted. Besides, this guy's probably useless like how the other men are around here except for Aizen-sama. Huh? Mila Rose laughed. For once we agree on something, Apache. This guy's probably no different than all the other jerks around here. Sunday through Sunday sighed. As usual, it was as if Apache and Mila Rose were trying to see who was better. Like them, she was surprised that a human had been recruited, but knew that Aizen would have a reason for allowing such a thing to happen. Rather than speak to them, Sunday through Sunday looked over at Harrible. Instead of going by Apache and Mila Rose's assumption, she would see what their leader thought of the human. Harrible-sama, she said. What is this human like? Harrible was silent for a moment. His name is Ben Tennyson. And unlike your assumption about the men here, girls, he is far from useless. This got the girls' attention. If Harrible praised someone, then they had to be good. Really? Apache asked with her mouth open. What's he like? You'll soon find out, Harrible told her, causing the girls to look at each other in confusion. Baragan has requested that Ben should do battle with some of his own fraction. The three's eyes widened in shock. Then Mila Rose scoffed. Figures, she said. That old fart will do anything to make himself look superior. What about you, Harrible-sama? Do you think this Ben Tennyson stands a chance? It depends on well Ben fights, Hannibal told her. In the fights I've seen him in, he has proven to be quite clever. I believe he can win. The three girls looked at each other. This Ben Tennyson guy had to be something to earn Hannibal's respect. But at that moment, Ben figured that he was gonna die of boredom. This place was nice and all to him, but it had absolutely nothing. No TV, no video games, no chili fries, and no smoothies either. Talk about torture. Not only that, but now Ben had to choose to be a fraction to one of those Espada guys. All poor Ben wanted to do was go home. Something was up though. Why didn't Aizen simply let him go home? At that moment, Ben heard a knocking at the door. Benjamin, Tozen's voice said. It's me. May I come in? Sure, Ben said, quite caught off guard by such a thing. The door opened and Tozen walked in. I trust you're comfortable, Benjamin, he asked him. Yes, sir, Ben told him. Just bored out of my mind, he said in his head. But Tozen was one of the few people he liked being around, so he didn't say that aloud. You're probably wondering why Aizen-sama has not merely sent you home, Tozen said, causing Ben's eyes to widen. It would seem I am right, judging by your silence. Ben looked at the ground in embarrassment. The truth is, Benjamin, Tozen said in a grave voice that drew Ben's attention. Aizen-sama requires your assistance. Ben stared at Tozen. His assistance? You see, Ben. You came to Hueco Mundo at a very bad time. We are about to go to war. Ben groaned as he looked at the ground. He remembered the last time he had gotten caught up in wars. The first was when he had to battle the hybrid from wiping out all other races in existence. The second was when that little girl Probity had asked him to stop the war on her home planet. While both had different results, Ben had hoped that he had seen the last of wars, at least for a while. You seem familiar with war, Benjamin Tennyson, Tozen said after noting Ben's disgruntled expression. I have, Ben said. Not my favorite thing. Let me guess, you want me to help fight in this war? Yes, Ben, Tozen said. But we have a good cause for this war. We are about to go to war against people called Shinigami, who live in a place called Soul Society. They are ruthless and corrupted, doing things only for their own ambition and not caring about the suffering of others. Ben looked at Tozen in shock. Are they that terrible? Tozen nodded. Indeed they are, Benjamin. I myself had experienced the cruelty of Soul Society. They allowed one of their own to kill a dear friend of mine and let him go unpunished. Pity for Tozen and anger at Soul Society filled Ben's mind. Dude, Ben said, getting up. That is so not cool. For a moment, Tozen was a bit confused by Ben's words. But he figured that it must be what modern kids used, and he could easily tell by Ben's tone that he was angry. What I have been through is just one example of their wickedness, Tozen went on. And their ruler, the Spirit King, merely sits on his throne and allows the corrupted to do as they please. Aizen wants to overthrow him and create a world of peace. This amazed Ben. Was Aizen really trying to do that? To Ben, it always seemed like Aizen treated everyone else as children and that Aizen was the only adult. But Tozen seemed a truthful person, so maybe Aizen was fighting for peace. I will leave the decision to you, Benjamin, Tozen said. But your help would be really appreciated. Ben looked at the ground in silence. After hearing Tozen's story, he knew that he couldn't just leave things alone. Unfortunately, Benjamin, Tozen said. Something else requires your attention first. Ben looked at Tozen in confusion. What did he need to do now? Baragan has requested of Aizen that you battle his fraction. He believes that your battles with the Privaron Espada were not convincing enough to prove your worth. Ben sighed. Figures the old guy was the one who was completely against him. Aizen said it would be an excellent idea so that we can see more of what you can do, Tozen explained. But he did say that he would leave it up to you. I'll think about it, Ben said. He personally wanted in the mood to get into any more fights. but it looked like fighting was the only way to get some respect around here. Incidentally, Benjamin, Tozen said to Ben, have you decided which Espada you would like to be a fraction to? To be honest, Ben didn't want to be anyone's fraction. Nothing personal, but it didn't make Ben feel comfortable. But now that Ben knew what the Espada were doing. Hold on a minute, something in Ben's mind thought. Remember what Dordoni said? He said you had to be like the devil himself here. Show any compassion and you would wind up with a blade in your back. This doesn't make any sense. It seems that you still don't trust us, Tozen said. And due to your previous encounters it is completely understandable. You see, Benjamin, Las Noches is the only haven in Hueco Mundo. Beyond this sanctity is world where it is killed or be killed. That attitude has continued within Las Noches itself. Yami is a prime example. Ben nodded, despite the fact that Tozen was blind. But Tozen went on. But Lord Aizen does not approve of needless violence. We thought you might have been a spy for Soul Society. That is why he allowed Yami to fight you. That's how they handle spies? Ben thought. I know it is difficult, Benjamin, Tozen said. But Aizen-sama is righteous. And if anyone tries to harm you, Aizen will make sure that justice is done. This didn't really fill Ben with confidence. First, everyone had been all up for killing him. Now they were trying to play buddy-buddy with him. But Tozen's story about Soul Society seemed convincing enough. And Ben had become friends with some of the most unusual of people. Some of them had indeed wanted to kill him. Take Kevin for example. Now on the topic of having to work with any of the Espada. Most of them gave him the creeps. In fact, the only two that didn't bother Ben were Hannibal and Stark. Stark didn't mind him and Hannibal was the only one who gave him an honest compliment. Ben blushed when he realized that he thought that Hannibal was rather beautiful despite the fact that she kept her face covered up. He thought about his decision for a moment. No offense to Stark, but Ben figured the guy looked extremely lazy. During his first time with the Espada, Ben could see that Stark wanted nothing more than to drop down and fall asleep. Is it all right if I tell you later? His face started to turn red, afraid that Tozen might tease him about it. But Tozen didn't seem the type of man to do such a thing. Jin on the other hand would. He certainly looked like the type of guy to do that. I understand, Benjamin, Tozen said. I shall inform Aizen-sama. Also, would you like some time to think about Baragan's challenge? Ben sighed and looked at the ground. He highly doubted that the old man was going to respect him no matter what he did. But he also knew that if he didn't make a stand, then Baragan would probably continue to harass him. All right, Ben told him. I'll do it. Tozen nodded. I have confidence in you, Benjamin. Good luck. Ben couldn't help but feel a little touched that Tozen told him that. He really felt that he could become friends with him. It wasn't long before all of Las Noches was aware that Ben was now going up against one of Baragan's minions. In the majority's opinion, it was foolish. Ben had already proven that he could handle himself against a Privaron Espada, and they were second only to the regular Espada. Even the weakest of my fraction are more than capable of dealing with the Privaron Espada, Baragan had said when anyone told him their opinion on the outcome between Ben and his fraction. That little brat will be no match for any of them. Of course, the main reason most were interested was because they wanted to see more of Ben's forms. Sayel was talking to his own fraction about it. What great timing! Sayel said to them cheerfully. I didn't think I'd get the chance to see more of Ben's forms so soon. I hope he uses ones we haven't seen yet. I feel like imitating Yami and yelling Suelta. The fight was to take place outside. Tozen had come to Ben's room and led him outside. Are you ready for this, Benjamin? Tozen asked him. Beating Baragan's men does not necessarily mean that he will respect you. Ben shrugged. I figured, he said. But I might as well let him know who he's dealing with. Soon, they went outside. What greeted Ben was a big shock. It was daylight now. But Ben noticed something was off. Instead of the massive dome, he saw a bunch of towers and pillars. He scratched his head in confusion. The dome you no doubt saw outside is a fake sky that Aizen-sama created for us, Tozen explained to Ben. It is always night in Hueco-Mundo, so Aizen-sama decided to bring light to the darkness. Ben whistled as he looked up in the sky. He had to give points to Aizen for creativity. "Ah," said Aizen's voice. "Tozen, Ben. I'm glad you could make it." Both turned their heads in the direction of Aizen's voice. He was standing at the left of them, accompanied by the other Espada and several people that Ben figured had to be their fraction. He gave a look over to Haribel, wondering if she would want Ben to join her fraction. He was then aware that the girls next to Haribel were 3 other girls. He blushed a little red when he realized that each of them was rather cute. "This is the kid everyone's been talking about," a voice asked. "That's a laugh. He looks pathetic." Ben turned to see who said that. He noticed that it came over from where Baragan and his fraction were. The one who said it was a man with no shirt, which showed the many red tattoos on his body. Another one, short one who looked around the same age as Ben as well as a feminine appearance, spoke. "Lord Baragan, you honestly want us to fight him?" Baragan looked at the speaker. "Aizen-sama," Baragan said with heavy sarcasm, "believes this boy is of use to us. I want him proven wrong." Ben glared at Baragan. Then his attention was drawn by Haribel's fraction. "So this is the big, bad, Ben Tennyson we were told so much about," said the girl with the different colored eyes. "Sure doesn't look like much." Ben frowned at that. "Appearances can be deceiving, Apache," said the dark-skinned Amazon-looking one. Ben couldn't help but wonder if she had gained Haribel's lack of modesty. "You're an example of that yourself." "What was that?" Mila Rose, the one called Apache, shouted. As the two argued, the third girl walked over to Ben. She was much more composed than Apache and Mila Rose, but Ben couldn't figure out why she had one of those long sleeves over her mouth. Was she trying to cover a pimple or something? "I apologize for my comrade's rudeness, Ben Tennyson," the girl said in a soft voice. "My name is Sunday through Sunday. Haribel-sama holds you in high regard. I hope you do not disappoint her." "Same here," Apache and Mila Rose said, looking at Ben. "If you do anything to make Haribel-sama look bad, then we will make you pay." Ben gulped at this. Talk about loyal. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea to join Haribel's fraction if the others were ready to kill him. "Can we get this over with?" Grimjo rudely blurted out. The others next to him, obviously his fraction, nodded their agreement. Aizen smiled. "Of course, Grimjo," Aizen said to him. He turned to face Baragan now. "Baragan, have you chosen who Ben shall battle?" Baragan looked at Aizen, and then at Ben, and then back at his fraction. He looked at each one as if to size up which one should fight Ben first. "Kulehorn," Baragan said finally. Ben noticed several of the others wince or grimace at this. Who was this person? Was he weak or something? But Ben's thoughts were interrupted by a somewhat obnoxious voice that shouting cheerfully. "Okay, okay, okay, okay." Ben turned to see the source of the voice, and suddenly thought that he had walked into a nightmare. Twirling like a ballerina was a muscular man dressed in clothes that were definitely not meant for a guy to wear. His pants too tight and his shirt hardly covered his chest. He had long purplish hair and wore what looked like a small tiara on his head. His face was the worst. It was as if the guy had tried and failed to make himself look like a woman. "I am Lord Baragan's fraction, Charlotte Kulehorn," the man said while winking at Ben the same way a flirty girl would. The whole thing had Ben's face turned green enough to match his jacket. "Oh my," Charlotte said in a poor imitation of a girl's voice. "Are you all right?" "Just feeling a little disturbed is all," Ben said weakly, taking a step away from Charlotte. Unfortunately, Charlotte didn't get the message that he was the one who was creeping poor Ben out. "It's no good fighting if you aren't well," Charlotte said. "Maybe we should get you some help." "No need," Ben said. "I'm okay. And I'm grateful that I didn't eat any lunch yet." Well then, Charlotte said energetically, oblivious to what Ben meant. Shall we begin? He asked while striking a feminine pose. Ben resisted the urge to bolt right then and there. Sure, Ben shrugged, while struggling to keep himself from feeling grossed out. He knew that he was gonna have nightmares after this. Good, Charlotte said, pulling out his sword and kissing the blade. Let's go. Quickly, Ben activated the Ultimatrix, set the dial and slammed it down. After the flash of green light, Ben was replaced by a tall and lanky cycloptic creature made out of purple rock. Pink stone stuck out of his back like spikes and one stuck out of his forehead like a horn. This new form struck a fighting pose. Chromastone, the form shouted. Aizen raised his eyebrow with interest at this new form. Chromastone, as Ben called it, seemed to be made of rock, but its scrawny frame clearly indicated that it made more powers than just its body. He was curious to see what Ben could do with this form. But for the most part, none of the people seeing Ben for the first time were particularly impressed with this form. It didn't look intimidating and was rather a disappointment. In fact, Baragan thought Ben was mocking him by turning into such a weak-looking form. Charlotte, on the other hand, didn't look bothered one bit. In fact, he seemed rather interested in Chromastone. He said while running a hand through his own hair. So you have decided to compete with my beauty by turning into a form made of precious stones, Ben Tennyson, he asked. I'm sorry, but there is no beauty in all creation that can compare to mine. He then let out a giggle. Chromastone blinked at him. Beauty? Sorry pal, I think you need to get a reality check. It's kinda freaking me out. Neutra, Grimjo's fraction, and anyone else that could starting laughing at Chromastone's comment. Now it was Charlotte's turn to blink at Chromastone. Oh my, he gasped. Then he walked up to Chromastone, who naturally took a step back. Charlotte looked at Chromastone for a moment, brought his hand back, and slapped Chromastone right across the face. Being made of silicon, Chromastone hardly felt the slap. But he was still thrown off the fact that the guy actually slapped him. Just how bad did this guy think he was a woman? How dare you? Charlotte yelled, obviously very offended by Chromastone's words. What right have you to judge a person by their appearance? To be perfectly honest, Charlotte did have a point. Ben had plenty of encounters with weird people and creatures. But then again, none of them had ever acted like the opposite of their gender before, so Charlotte was something. And in a disturbingly bad way. Come on, already, Grimjo yelled. We came to see a fight, not some beauty contest. Start fighting. HMPH, Charlotte said with his hands on his hips and nose up in a girly manner. Fine then, he huffed. Then he turned to face Ben. I guess it's time to start now, isn't it? He winked at Chromastone, causing Chromastone to blanch. With that, Charlotte leaped high up into the air. Chromastone looked up and saw him flipping back down to where he was standing. Beautiful Charlotte Kuhlhorn's miracle sweet ultra funky fantastic dramatic romantic sadistic erotic exotic athletic guillotine attack. Chromastone had been too baffled by the long and pointless adjectives that Charlotte was shouting out, that he had almost failed to notice that Charlotte was now right above him, bring his sword down. Chromastone managed to leap out of the way in time, but he turned around to see a giant gust of sound that burst from the ground when Charlotte struck down with his sword. His eye widened. This guy may be a little cracked in the head, but he was certainly strong. Charlotte said, smiling at Chromastone's amazed expression. I see my beautiful technique has left you completely speechless. No, Chromastone said. Not really. With that, Chromastone raised his hands and fired what appeared to be a rainbow-colored beam of energy out of them and right into Charlotte's stunned face. The blast knocked him backwards and fell but first on the desert sand. Interesting, Sayel said as he looked like Chromastone. Judging from the fact that the beam he shot was rainbow-colored and had absolutely nothing to do with Acero, I'd say that this Chromastone has the ability to absorb sunlight and convert it into offensive blasts. Quite impressive actually. Apache shrugged as she overheard Sayel. So he's got some moves. Big deal. Grimjo snorted. So he picked a rock monster that shoots rainbow beams? TCH. That's pathetic. I liked it better when he used things like that humongous or that beat up Yami. This got the attention of all the other fraction. No one had bothered to tell them that Ben could fight on par with an Espada. Not even Grimjo's own fraction were told about this. They looked at Ben with greater interest. Charlotte brushed the sand off his clothes and looked at Chroma Stone. Not bad, Ben Tennyson. Seems this is a fight to see who can pull off the more beautiful technique. Ben was really starting to regret choosing Chroma Stone. Every time he made a move, Charlotte would misinterpret it as an attempt to upstage him in beauty. Ben shivered at the thought. He had to hurry up and end this fight now. He charged at Charlotte, ready to punch him. Charlotte dodged out of the way and swung his sword. It clanged off Chroma Stone's silicon body. Charlotte tried to strike again, but Chroma Stone charged forward, grabbing Charlotte with surprising strength for his scrawny size and slammed Charlotte into the ground. He fired another rainbow-colored blast, but Charlotte blocked himself with his hands. This time the blast didn't do anything. You caught me off guard with your little technique before, Ben Tennyson, Charlotte said. But now that I know, it won't work on me again. Chroma Stone cringed. He had to think of something fast. Well, it looked like Chroma Stone was no use against this guy, so he'd have to use a different alien. Touching the Ultimatrix dial, Ben transformed. This time, he transformed into what appeared to be a pile of slime in humanoid form. A strange UFO floating above his head. Goop, the creature yelled in high-pitched voice. Ooh! Charlotte cried in disgust upon seeing Goop. What is that disgusting thing? Hey! Goop yelled at Charlotte. I have a name you know. Baragan snorted in annoyance. Are you trying to mock me, brat, by transforming into these ridiculous creatures? Hey, Goop is a good choice, Goop snapped at Baragan. I'll prove it, too. With that, Goop made his body lose its humanoid shape and shot forward at Charlotte, the UFO device seeming to follow him as he did. Charlotte swung his sword, but it simply passed through Goop's slimy body. Charlotte recoiled as he regarded Goop like he was some kind of germ. But soon, Goop wrapped himself around Charlotte's body, completely immobilizing him. Everyone else watched as Charlotte struggled to break free of the slimy situation he was in. 1. It was disgusting, and 2. It was ugly. For someone like Charlotte, having something so ugly be so close to him was torture. Let go of me! Charlotte practically screamed. He tried to flay his limbs, but Goop had wrapped them up pretty tight. Say, uncle! Goop taunted, amused at how Charlotte was freaking out. Fascinating! Sayel cried. This form seems to be some kind of polymorph. Lacking in solid structure, Ben is capable of morphing this form to his needs. And the fact that it's immune to any kind of physical attack makes it even more useful of a form than at first glance. Oh, Ben, you naughty boy, keeping such useful forms up your sleeve. Hannibal nodded in agreement with Sayel. It was rather clever for Ben to have a form like Goop around. Do you see that, girls? She asked Apache, Mila Rose, and Sunday through Sunday Benjamin is a resourceful boy. Mila Rose silently admitted that she had to agree with Hannibal. The boy was definitely full of surprises. And the fact that most opponents would drop their guard due to Ben's human appearance only gave him one more advantage in a fight. She could not deny that Ben was very valuable to the cause. Then she found herself wondering what his human side was like. When Sunday through Sunday had set eyes on Ben, she could see something about him. Something that made you want to believe that no matter how hard the odds were, he would come out on top. She realized it was the type of feeling that Arrancar felt around Aizen. Apache, on the other hand, just laughed out loud. Come on, Hannibal-sama, she said. He's only doing this good cause he's battling Charlotte of all people. That drag queen is too vain and full of himself to be a challenge to anyone. I'll respect this kid after I see what he can do in a real fight. Unfortunately, her comment did not go unnoticed by Baragan, who was now fuming by Apache's words. It would be best if you were to keep your fractions' tongues in check, Hannibal, he said to her. Harrible turned her head to face Baragan. And perhaps it would have been best for you to not have underestimated Benjamin Tennyson. Baragan grit his teeth. He had to do something or he was going to be disgraced in front of the other Espada. He knew that he had to tip this in his favor. All right, Kulhorn, he yelled to Charlotte. That'll do for the warm-up. Warm-up? Goop yelled. Can't you just admit that I was winning the fight? Because you used summer slime form due to the fact that you were too cowardly to trade blows with Kulhorn? Baragan asked. I think not. I have someone else in mind for you to fight. Truth be told, Baragan had actually expected Charlotte to have defeated the brat long before now. He hadn't counted on the boy using a form like Goop. But to be honest, he should have known better than to send Charlotte out there. He had always deemed the man the most useless of his fraction. His was too vain and too fearful of ugly things to be of any true use. No, Baragan should have known to send a much more capable dragon to fight this cocky brat. But which one? He could easily send his most powerful fraction to deal with the brat, but he had stated that his weaker members could defeat Ben. And using one of his stronger fraction would be a waste of time and it would be over too quickly. He wanted to watch this Ben Tennyson suffer as well as watch Aizen be proven wrong for the first time in his life. Now which to use? Baragan thought as he looked at each of his fraction. The first among them was a tall man with white mask covering most of his face except for his mouth and his long blonde hair. A rapier was at his side as well as blade attached to his wrists. This man was Finder, the strategist of Baragan's fraction. The next one was the shortest of the group, the one with the young and rather girlish appearance. His clothing were a Mandarin-style jacket, sleeves rolled up on his elbows, and an upturned collar. His clothes, combined with the tiger skull on his head, made him fierce. He was Gijo Vega, one of Baragan's closer fraction. And he loved a good fight. The next two were the biggest of Baragan's fraction. The first one was massive and wore a helmet with short tusks protruding from the sides. The second one was extremely tall and had a resemblance to a tall and muscular Chinese monk. He had strange attachment to his chin that had two horn-like structures prod out from either sides. They were Nerga Parduok and Cho Neng POW. The last one was the one who had asked him if Ben was the one they were supposed to fight. He wore no jacket, which showed the red tattoos over his body. He wore a beak-like helmet on his head. His name was Avirama Redder, and he was most likely the most battle-crazy of Baragan's fraction. Baragan considered his options. He was certain that Cho could easily defeat Ben. Not even Humungosaur could compete with Cho's true power. But if he sent Cho, the others would consider him a coward to not sending someone Ben could hold his own against. He could send Nerga, but he had a feeling that Humungosaur could take care of him. That left Finder, Gijo, or Avirama. Avirama Redder. Baragan yelled. Crush him. Yes, Lord Baragan. Avirama yelled. It shall be done. With that, he walked forward. Realizing that he had a new opponent, Goop released Charlotte. Charlotte fell on his knees and began brushing himself off as he tried to make sure that he didn't have a trace of Goop left on him. Baragan looked at Charlotte disdainfully. I will deal with you later, Kulhorn, he said with contempt. Charlotte wilted at the glare he was receiving. Ben couldn't help but feel sorry for Charlotte. All right, the one called Avirama yelled. Gonna hurt you, gonna hurt you, gonna kill you. Goop tilted his head in confusion. What in the world are you doing? Avirama looked at Goop like he was crazy. What are you, retarded? It's a ritual. The two of us shout what we're gonna do to each other to get in the mood. Come on. Gonna hurt you. Gonna hurt you. Gonna kill you. If Goop could roll his eyes, he would have. This guy looked stupid and violent. And he had a habit of yelling what he wanted to do to Ben. That's when an idea came to Ben. He knew just the form to use against this guy. Touching the Ultimatrix, he transformed. In his place was a tailless, muscular, humanoid tiger. Rather big claws were in the middle of his hands, and he had a vicious look in his eyes. Wrath, he yelled. Jijo's eyes widened the most when everyone saw this new transformation. Another tiger? What the heck? But Wrath's attention was only on Avirama Redder. Let me tell you something, pal, he yelled. I'm gonna shove my hands down your throat, rip out your intestines, and use them to make a sweater. At first, Avirama just looked at Wrath in absolute shock. Then his face lit up into a huge grin. Yeah, he yelled. Now that's what I'm talking about. My blood is racing. All right, Wrath. You better not disappoint me. You better not disappoint me. Wrath shouted back. Avirama's grin widened. Scalp, Agila. Wrath watched as Avirama transformed. His body had now become like a giant bird man completely covered in red feathers. He soared into the sky and shrieked. Wrath balled his fists in excitement. Now you're making it interesting, he called. Avirama's real mouth, which was covered by the beak-like structure he now had, was grinning bigger than ever before. How's this for interesting? He called down to Wrath. Devora Pluma. Suddenly the feathers from Avirama's wings began firing at Wrath. The big guy just stood there as the feathers pelted him down. The desert sand around Wrath shooting up as each feather struck. Unlike Cirucci's feathers, which were blades, these feathers were as hard as stone. This, combined with how fast Avirama was shooting them, could be equal to that of a painful meteor shower. And the fact that he could instantly regrow his feathers made it so that he could keep up the attack as much as he wanted. TCH, Avirama groaned. He just stood there. And I was hoping that I was gonna get a good fight out of this. When the sand cleared, everyone was in for a surprise. Wrath was still there, still looking at Avirama like nothing had happened. He looked completely unhurt. Is that all you got? Wrath yelled. Is that all you've got? I felt raindrops more painful than that. Avirama thought he was in paradise. Long had he wanted an opponent that could get his adrenaline pumping and make him just go wild in a fight. And now here was this shape-shifting human who fit the bill entirely. After this fight, he'd have to see if Baragan would still let them keep Ben as a pet or something. Is that all I've got? Avirama repeated to Wrath. Not even close. With that, Redder fired off even more of his feathers at Wrath, who this time decided to dodge. He continued running to dodge, and proved to be quite good at it. But Avirama wouldn't let his foe get away. He flew after him. Meanwhile, Aizen walked over to Sayel. Well, Sayel, he said. What is your opinion on this? Sayel tapped his chin. Well, he said. While this form is not as interesting as some of Ben's other forms, it does have its uses. This form seems to be one purely for combat use, which is perfect to use against someone like Avirama Redder. Wrath seems to be highly aggressive and very short-tempered. He also appears to be less intelligent in this form, which allows him to brush off injuries like they were nothing. Avirama was getting impatient. After all he and Wrath had just been through, this couldn't be all he was capable of. All Wrath was doing was dodging his attacks. Come on, Wrath, Avirama yelled to the tiger-like creature. This is a fight. Birds and cats are natural enemies. Show me what you've got. Crouching down like a real tiger, Wrath leaped into the air and slammed Avirama with a perfect uppercut. But his attack didn't end there. He grabbed Avirama by the neck, swing his body so that he would wind up on Avirama's back, and gripped him in a headlock. Avirama struggled to get Wrath off, but Wrath's grip on his neck was like iron. The oxygen to his brain was effectively cut off. Let me tell you something, Avirama Redder. Wrath yelled despite the fact that Avirama was at his face. Birds are not cats' enemies. They're food. And Wrath raised his fist back and practically slammed it against Avirama's head. The blow was enough to send Avirama nosediving straight into the ground. Wrath let go of Avirama and stood to face him. Come on, Birdman, Wrath said. I thought you said you were going to hurt Wrath. How are you supposed to do that when you're having a sand sandwich? Baragan was gritting his teeth and his fists were balled extremely tight. So far, this boy had managed to make a fool out of 2 of his fraction. Slowly, Avirama got back up to his feet. He laughed weakly as he started to get air back in his system. "This is great," Avirama said. Ben Tennyson, he assumed another fighting stance. "I think I've just found my sparring partner." Wrath grinned. "Just don't come crying to me when I kick your butt so bad, Birdman." Avirama took off into the sky again and began blasting more of his feathers at Wrath. However, Wrath knew that if he kept fighting in his current form, things could get messy. So instead, he decided to try something else instead. Touching the Ultimatrix dial, he transformed again. In his place was a big, 2-legged turtle-like creature. Its arms were rather more like flippers and he had holes on his chest. "Terra Spin," this new form called. Avirama Redder yelled. "What happened? Why'd you change into some turtle thing?" "Change back to Wrath." "I'm afraid not," Terra Spin said. "I'm perfectly capable of defeating you with this form." Avirama laughed. "Defeat me? Defeat me? And how do you intend to do that as a turtle?" Terra Spin smiled. "Like this." Terra Spin tucked his head into his shell and jumped into his air. His legs connected together and altered themselves along with his arms to become more blade-like. Then, the limbs began to spin wildly like that of a fan and wind began pouring out of the holes in his chest. The wind erupted into a massive gale force. Avirama found himself struggling against it. "What does this boy not turn into?" Apache asked. So many forms and so many powers, Mila Rose noted. But Harrible Summer, Sunday through Sunday said. "What exactly does Aizen need Benjamin for?" Harrible merely watched as Terra Spin continued to use his wind powers on Avirama. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "But I am certain that Aizen has some need for Benjamin." Meanwhile, Avirama tried to fire more of his arrows, but Terra Spin managed to hover out of the way. He moved his body so that his chest was facing toward the ground, using the wind he produced to allow him to hover. He flew towards Avirama and slammed into the dumbfounded man. The two crashed into the ground again. Avirama was about to get up until Terra Spin slammed his shell into him again. "What do you think you're doing?" Baragan yelled. "Stop going easy on this human and finish him." Harrible looked at him. "Perhaps your subordinate isn't holding back," she stated. "Perhaps you made the mistake of underestimating Benjamin." Baragan glared at her. "Don't you dare mock me, Harrible. There is no way a human could defeat an Arrancar, let alone a member of my fraction." Apache grinned. "Then how come I see Ben over there beating up one of your fraction, then?" "I have seen enough," Aizen said suddenly. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at him. Even Ben and Avirama, who were locked in combat, stopped what they were doing. Baragan glared at Aizen. "Why are you stopping them? There hasn't been a winner yet." Aizen smiled at Baragan. "I believe that if we went any further, Ben would win." Baragan's eyes shot so wide. He visibly struggled to keep himself under control. "You seem pretty confident that the brat would win." Aizen just continued to smile at him. "I have seen enough of Ben's skills to come to the conclusion that he no doubt wields many forms that we have not yet seen. His wide variety of powers is what makes him so dangerous. And as Harrible had stated, Ben is very resourceful, as I have noticed with my own eyes. Without a doubt in my mind, Ben would be able to beat all of your fraction." Now all of Baragan's fraction were shocked and insulted by Aizen's words. And they weren't the only one. Harrible, Neutra, Grimjo, and Sayel's fraction were all shocked. Did Aizen really hold Ben in such high regards? "Redder! Kuhlhorn!" Baragan yelled. "Get out of my sight! You are no longer part of my fraction." Terra Spin's eyes widened as he heard this. He looked at Avirama and Charlotte, who both had looks of horror on their faces. He turned himself back to normal. "Hold on," he said. Isn't that a little harsh? Baragan glared at Ben. They are a disgrace. I have no need for people like that. Forgive us, Lord Baragan, we beg of you. Charlotte cried, getting on his knees and begging. Unforgivable. Baragan yelled, striking Charlotte across the face. Charlotte tried to get up, but Baragan began stomping on him in anger. Hey, knock it off! Ben yelled to him. He activated the Ultimatrix and turned into Swampfire. Before Baragan could attack Charlotte anymore, Swampfire created a wall of fire between him and Charlotte. Stay out of this, brat! Baragan said. Like I'm gonna let you beat up these guys just because they lost? Swampfire asked. So they lost? Big deal. That doesn't give you the right to hurt them. This was what really took everyone by surprise. They are useless to me, Baragan said to him. I have no use for them. Just because they lost? Swampfire asked. That's stupid. Baragan raised an eyebrow at Ben. Stupid, he asked. You dare? That's enough, Aizen said suddenly. Baragan, Ben is right. There is a chance for Charlotte and Avirama to become stronger now. You can use their battle with Ben as experience and motivation. They now have someone to try and surpass. You should not just get rid of them for losing one fight. Baragan was fuming. He had been humiliated and utterly degraded. Not only that, but Ben had the nerve to try and stand up to him. Unforgivable. Fine, he said. Avirama and Charlotte looked at Swampfire, who turned back into Ben. They walked over to him. And then they bowed. Ben Tennyson, Avirama said. We are in our debt. Yes, Charlotte said. To defend someone you don't even know despite the fact that they were trying to hurt you. You possess the most beautiful heart of all. Ben nervously chuckled at this. Talk about awkward. And now everyone, Aizen said. Ben Tennyson is to decide which of the Espada that he shall be a fraction to. Have you chosen, Ben? Ben thought about it and took a gulp. Well, he thought. It's now or never. I have chosen, Ben said. I would like to be Haribal's fraction. Aizen nodded. Haribal, he said to her. Do you have any objections? Haribal had to admit that she was a little surprised that Ben would pick her. Neutra laughed. What does he think he's doing? Choosing a woman? Pathetic. Ben frowned at him. Then tell me why she's number 3 and you're only number 5. Neutra frowned. You have something to say? Ben activated the Ultimatrix. Neutra grinned. Not tired, eh, Ben? Neutra, Aizen said. Ben has made his decision. The only one who has anything left to say is Haribal. Neutra nodded. Now Haribal, Aizen said to her. Do you have any objections with Ben being your fraction? Haribal analyzed all she knew about Ben. He had the power to turn into different creatures. He proved to be a very resourceful individual and was not brutish or arrogant like most of the men were around here. Nor did Ben seem ambitious. He could use that device on his wrist for personal gain, but he didn't. And seeing Ben stand up to Baragan for bullying his own fraction was something else. Haribal knew without a doubt that Ben was special. I have no objections. Nor do I believe my fraction has any. She looked at her 3 fraction. Do you girls? The 3 girls looked at each other. They had to admit that Ben was different from all the other guys here. He was a human after all, so that was probably the reason why. Sure, it was gonna be weird having a guy join a fraction with mostly females, but personally none of them could think of a reason why Ben shouldn't join. We have no objections, Haribal-sama, Sunday through Sunday said with a curt nod. Haribal nodded back at her, and she turned to face Aizen. So it is settled, Aizen said. Ben shall now be part of Haribal's fraction. The girl named Lilynette snickered. I bet he just joined cause he thinks they're hot. Ben glared at Lilynette the way he would glare at Gwen or Kevin when they teased him. It felt like he had a little sister who was teasing him about a crush. But if anyone else heard Lillinette's comment, they didn't show it. Aizen nodded at Ben. I will leave you to get acquainted with your teammates, Ben. Take care. With that, Aizen and just about everyone else walked off, leaving Ben alone with Hannibal, Apache, Mila Rose, and Sunday through Sunday. Charlotte and Averama were walking a good distance from Baragan and their fellow fraction members. So, Apache said once they were the only ones left. Why did you want to join us? And if you only did it because you want to try and get with Hannibal-sama, I'll kill you. Wait, Ben said, waving his hands in front of him. It's not like that at all. Hannibal was the only person who I felt comfortable around. Mila Rose frowned. What do you mean by that? If you think that Hannibal-sama is some kind of weakling then. She's the third Espada, isn't she? Ben pointed out to her. And even if she wasn't, I still would have picked her. Well, there went the trio's accusation that Ben only did it because Hannibal was one of the higher-ups. This statement even left Hannibal momentarily surprised. You chose me not as one of the Espada but as a person, she asked him. Ben was just full of surprises. Yes, Ben said to her. Blushing a little red and scratching the back of his head, he said. You just seem like a good person. Stark is too, but I don't know what I'd do about a guy who's asleep most of the time. At this, Hannibal's fraction all laughed. Even Hannibal cracked a small smile behind her jacket. You surprise me, Ben Tennyson, she said softly. I believe I can trust you. Sunday through Sunday nodded. He does seem that way. I agree, Mila Rose said. About time Hueco Mundo got a guy who wasn't useless. Apache scoffed. I'll let him stay for now. But he's gonna have to work his butt off before he thinks he can impress me. Mila Rose laughed. Yeah, right, Apache, she said. I bet your little heart was screaming out for Ben when he was fighting. Look who's talking, Mila Rose, Apache said. I bet your heart was pounding whenever he turned into those monsters and yelled out their names. Ben found himself very embarrassed. Here these two rather cute girls were arguing about who liked him. And they were doing it right in front of him as if he wasn't even there. Girls, Hannibal said. I think that's enough. Instantly, the two girls stopped fighting and stood at attention like soldiers. Hannibal then turned her head to look at Ben. Does that bother you? She asked. Ben shrugged. I've seen worse at home. He admitted. Hannibal nodded. Welcome to my fraction, Ben Tennyson.